Welcome to Focus on Business, a podcast show for photographers with me, your host, Jane Goodrich. I'm talking to successful photographers so you can learn from our experiences and have the business of your dreams. So join us and let's focus on business. Hi, so today's episode, we have the fantastic Chelsy Weisz, and she has been a wedding photographer for a long time and more recently ventured into education and also podcast host of Your Next Brave Step. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Jane, so much for having me. As you said, my name is Chelsy Weisz. I am based out of Northwest North Dakota. So I am 40 miles from Canada and 50 miles from Montana. So basically the middle of nowhere. I started my business in 2013 with a 6-month-old baby on my hip. I think it's kind of a pretty similar story to a lot of photographers starting their business with, a newborn at home and, you got your first camera. I actually, my senior year of high school, had written down in my yearbook that I wanted to be a photographer. So I went to school for business, not for photography, because I wanted to understand the business side of everything first, because I figured I could learn the art of it later. I didn't even have a camera at that time. So I went to business school for 2 years and then got pregnant with my daughter, Skylar. Left school, came home and was like, okay, I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom, and was bored out of my mind by 6 months and was like, I need something to get me out of the house. And so I started the photography business and I kind of went full in right away. I started with family photography and then I tried newborn photography and then I did senior photography for a while, which I really liked. I had a studio, but then I really struggled with how hard the seniors were on themselves, and just the scheduling was not working. And I got to a point in my business, this is not working. Something's got to be better, but I like parts of this, but I don't like other parts of it. So I really sat down and what do I want to do? And I started wedding photography. And that is where I just fell in love with wedding photography. One, I knew my schedule at least 6 months out. So setting up a babysitter was totally fine. And no one was going to cancel on me for volleyball practice like an hour beforehand. That was awesome. I think the part of wedding photography that I really, really loved is, I don't know if you've ever read the book Start With Why or seen the TED Talk. Yes. So it's so good. So I had read that a few years back. And what I found my why was to educate and inspire others so that we can celebrate a transformation. And a wedding was exactly that. I got to educate and inspire my brides as they went through the planning stuff. And the wedding was this celebration of a transformation from a bride to a wife. And that just lights me up even to this day. And that theme of my why has really carried on in so many different parts of my life. Everything has really changed and evolved a lot since then. But that why, that through thread, has really been my guiding light in all that I do. And when you understand that, it makes much more sense onto the different journeys.
It is a fantastic book. So yeah, definitely check that book out and also the TED Talk. I love the fact that you navigated your journey and realized, okay, that's not going to work. So I'm going to figure out this, and I'm not loving the last minute scheduling or cancellation. So what will work within my life, as well as inspire you and keep the fires burning. Apart from probably learning a little bit quicker, if you were to travel back in time, say 2013 when you started your business, what would you do differently?
Actually, honestly, I don't know if I would have changed anything. I learned a lot through all the different things that I photographed between newborns and families and all this stuff. I learned a lot about managing client expectations. And I think, honestly, the one thing I have really honed in the last few years is the mindset of every season in life is going to be different. And you kind of have to honor that season and take what serves you into the next season and leave behind the rest. So as long as you can basically think of life is for me and that I can choose to take with me the lessons and leave everything else, that no matter what you go through, there's never going to be a wrong direction to it. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I think probably could have put some more boundaries up with clients earlier, some expectations maybe a little bit that would have made situations easier, but I think I needed to learn those lessons. Otherwise I wouldn't have wouldn't have learned the lesson, right?
Yeah. And you sort of need to experience it a little bit to then appreciate, okay, I love the schedule of weddings. So you had to go through I really can't, last minute schedules, or I really need the boundaries. So I really like that answer. And I know you're in the middle of nowhere. If you want to move your business to another middle of nowhere or to a big city, what would be the first thing that you would do and say, okay, I'm moving in 3 months. What do I have to do for my business?
That's great. I actually did a podcast episode on my podcast with a military wife. And so she had kind of talked through some of this. I haven't actually done it, but
you have some expertise.
From some expertise. The first thing I guess I would do is decide, do I want to keep doing exactly what I'm doing as far as type of genre and that type of thing? If you're going to keep things the same, then on social media and especially your blog, start changing all of your keywords and locations to whatever that new location is going to be. SEO for blogging takes a little bit longer to kind of catch up. So start changing those things now. Say I'm moving to Manhattan, Kansas in 3 months. I would start changing all of my SEO stuff inside my homepage to Manhattan, Kansas wedding photographer, K-State wedding photographer, engagement pictures, Kansas State University, because that demographic is the type of demographic that would be getting engaged and wanting to book. And that is where I would kind of put that, because it takes 6 to 8 months before you're going to see those results for SEO. I love SEO. I love marketing, all of the things. And so I would really first focus on those things that are going to take longer and then start focusing on my social media. So putting my location, highlighting a session that I did a while ago, I would put the location as whatever that new location is. And that really just starts to open you up and use hashtags along those lines. So that's kind of what I would do as far as like a marketing standpoint. If you have any printed material, trying to decide, are you going to reprint stuff? Are you going to are you moving just this one time? Are you going to be moving multiple times? Yeah. That's where I would start, I guess.
It's interesting that you also say you could actually use it to learn, right? Okay, I'm moving. Do I really want to continue for me in newborn photography, or do I want to get into something else? I think it's actually a really good point in your life to say, okay, is this really working for me at this point? Yes, let's move forward. No, what else could I do? What else do I like to do? Should I go into and also you can see the market that you're going into. My market, I'm so jealous of anyone that has a senior, even though they cancel for volleyball for senior photography, because I do love that age. But my market does not have a senior market. They just say, what do you mean? Yearbook photos? So I get jealous. If I was to move somewhere that had a market for senior photography, I'd A, love it, and B, definitely this is probably what I'm going to be doing. So
yeah,
that's a
move is such a transformative part in your life. You get to reinvent yourself because nobody knows you there as a newborn photographer or as a wedding photographer. So if you want to come out as, hey, this is what I do, this is what I offer, it's a great time to do that and to take the time to really reevaluate, what do I love, what do I not want to do. It's a really perfect time to do it.
Yeah, and what you said is, you are known for this, and also it could even be a pricing thing. I'm known in my area for X. I realize that I need to raise my prices. I'm going to use this time to actually go and really price myself correctly. There's so many things to move. Maybe I'll just move for the fun of it. I'm just kidding. No, I wouldn't move. I know it's really hard. I like the positive spin that you're putting on it of using it as time to reevaluate. You already mentioned SEO and that you love SEO. I do too. Is that one of your favorite forms of marketing, or what would you say would be your favorite form?
I would say SEO is probably my favorite form of marketing. I think SEO and social media both have their places in your business. I don't think that you can totally focus completely on one and not the other. I like to think of SEO as a website, that type of thing, as your long game marketing, because it takes a little time for that traction to start. But once it does, you're going to see return on investment years later. I have a blog post that I wrote in 2019 that is all about how to plan a stylized shoot for photographers. And I would say I get anywhere between 10 and 30 people signing up for that opt-in every single week. And that was a blog post that I had written and probably took me 2 hours to put together, but it was back in 2019. So the fact that I'm still getting traction on that and I don't have to keep promoting it, it's just kind of put it on Pinterest. And it took maybe 6 months for it to really take off on Pinterest. And then it just keeps bringing in people and I don't pay anything to promote it at all. So that's what I love about SEO is that it can be this long game marketing. So I actually have a course called Blogging for Photography that goes through how to set up your blog, how to pick all of the different topics that you want to blog about, how to choose keywords, how to write a blog post, all the things, start to end. And
we will definitely put that in the show notes because I know that I am such a visual person. I just love the shoot aspect of it. As my mother would say, I can't string a sentence together. So I actually say I can write. But there's a difference between writing for SEO than there is a really good email. So there's an art to it. H1 headers, just what are you going to put? So that is great. And definitely going to put that in the show notes because we do get a lot of questions about how do I blog? I actually outsourced my blog writing. I'll go in and update. And that's why I love the fact that you have a course for people to do it because not everyone's in the opportunity where they can actually outsource. I just knew it wasn't in my wheelhouse from day one. I was like,
and technology is making this a lot easier too, especially for people who don't feel like they're good writers with AI and ChatGPT. We actually just added a module last year on how to use ChatGPT to write a blog post. And that's in the last module. So you get to basically, this is what I have, put in your notes from your session and it'll show you how to use it to not sound like a robot, to actually sound like what you want it to sound like. It's just a really great springboard for creating content that sounds good, is SEO ready. And it's probably my favorite module that we've added to the course.
That's awesome. I use ChatGPT and I find that you can actually train it. I think that that's fantastic. For me, it's taking the research and the brain dump. It gives you the brain dump that you can then tweak to your brand voice. And eventually it gets there once you start saying, make it friendlier, make it this. And we touched on it when I mentioned that I outsource my blog writing. We have to do so many things as a photographer, accounting, blogs, SEO, all this stuff. You sound good at a lot of things like the SEO on Pinterest and, social media and your photography. So do you actually ever outsource anything of your business?
So I actually outsource my editing for my weddings. So I will edit what goes on the blog and then I send that off to my editor. So they basically sync everything back and forth and then I'll go through and double check it. But that was one of the very first things that I outsourced. And I think it can be kind of intimidating to outsource that because it's like, that's my finished product. That's the thing. And so it's really hard, I think, for us as creatives to let go of that control. But I had to really sit down and, okay, do I want to spend 6 hours in Lightroom? Sync, or do I want to choose my favorites, edit those, and let someone else just match them up?
Yeah.
Because if I've already done, this is what it's going to look like and chosen my style of everything, then the rest of it is just busy work that I don't actually have to do. Someone else can do that. And, when you're first starting out, you might be strapped for cash. And so it's not as valuable for you to outsource it as your time is. But eventually in your business, you're going to get to a point where your time is more valuable than the cost of outsourcing something and understanding the advantages that you're going to get. So for me, when I outsource editing, I can have a much quicker turnaround for my weddings. I will tell, the biggest thing ever is under promise and over deliver. So I have my clients that it's going to be 6 weeks and they get them back in like a week and a half. And they're like, oh my gosh.
That's like faster than I do for a newborn shoot.
Yeah, but it's because I have these systems in place. But I also have that buffer in there where I get sick or something goes wrong technical. I still have that 6 weeks. And, I don't ever tell them it's going to be a week and a half. And that's where you can really, create this amazing client experience where, you're setting that expectation of this and then you can over deliver. And they're just like, oh my gosh, our photographer is so amazing. She got it done way faster than that.
I love that. Because I think when we use that term under promise and over deliver, we often think, oh, I'm going to give them more images or we're going to give them extra print credit. No. It can be something as simple as I'm going to tell my clients it's going to be 3 to 4 weeks during fall, but then I'll get them back in 2 weeks because I know they want to get the holiday cards out. And that's a nice surprise and delight. So I love the fact that you do that.
The other thing when you do that is you want to make sure in your email when you're delivering them, restate that you got it to them earlier and make it a big deal so that they understand that this was a big deal. Hey, I loved your session so much that I couldn't quit editing and dove in, and they're beautiful. They're some of my favorite images. And
So
I
for
think
me, I have to tell them that because I get so many repeat clients, I have to sort of say, this is lucky because they don't it all the time. So
yeah.
Otherwise, I'm going to get whole people being like, you gave that to me in 2 weeks. And so, yeah, I agree. Sort of let them know that it is not normal and they got an
Yeah. And so after the wedding, I'll email them the day after, hey, this is what you can expect 6 to 8 weeks or whatever it is. So that way you've also, even though it's in your contract, I've told them at the wedding and then they have it in writing afterwards that this is what it's going to be. And then when it's delivered early, it's a surprise and delight.
Yeah, I love that. We touched on this a little bit earlier when you were talking about your senior sessions, the last minute cancellations throwing off your work-life balance. How do you manage it? So if we're speaking to wedding photographers, do you have a set schedule for a wedding week? It's not that you're shooting every week. If you are, bravo to you. But I was very jealous of a photographer who was like, yep, Tuesdays are editing, Wednesdays are this, I shoot this, that, and the other. And so do you have that, or is it winging it kind of thing, depending on the day?
Yeah. I have put together the ideal workflow for me of what I would like for it to look like. It doesn't always happen like that. Life happens, and I have 2 kids at home, and I'm divorced as well. So I have 50-50 custody with my ex. And so some weeks I have the kids after a shoot and some weeks I don't. My life is up in the air, and that's just kind of how life goes. So if you can create like a standardized workflow or standardized operating procedure, if we want to sound super corporate, basically this is how it should go. So for me, when I get done with the wedding, I will come home and I back up images right away. The next morning, the one thing I do is that was a sentence there. One thing I do as well is I will schedule in my editing time whenever I book a session. I think that's something that many new photographers kind of forget about is that, okay, I'll schedule these sessions, but like, when are you going to actually edit them? So for me, my brain works better when I have fewer distractions. So I don't have dogs running around. I don't have kids running around. I need that focused space to really get in the flow of things. And so I will make sure that I go into my calendar and schedule, okay, I've got an engagement session on Thursday evening, Friday from 2 to 4. The kids are going to be at basketball or whatever. That's when I'm going to do that editing. So at least scheduling in when you're going to do it. As far as weddings go, I will always back up images right away. I try to cull images that next morning, usually sitting on the couch, cuddled up under a blanket with Grey's Anatomy on in the background or something like that, and get through culling it. Also for weddings, because I use an editing service, I have to schedule that out. So it's okay, these have to be culled and sent to my editor by this time. So that's good to give myself that external deadline, especially during the busy season. You have to schedule those things out. Unless you have like a dedicated one-on-one that's like a smaller volume, then maybe you don't. But for me, okay, these have to be turned in by midnight on this day. And generally, I'll look at my schedule, be like, okay, I know I've got something coming up right after that wedding. I'm going to give myself an extra 2 days and not schedule it the day after. It's going to be 3 days after, whatever. But I think just looking at schedules from like a bird's eye view of, that's how my brain works. I have to see all of the things.
Well, I think that's actually a really good point of scheduling in editing time. And it doesn't have to be set. Whatever your flow is, we always think we're going to get faster with editing. You just get pickier, guys. You just get pickier. But I outsource my editing too. But I got into a flow of doing the exact same thing. Even just after a family shoot, I would go to my studio. I called it dumping my images into my computer, making sure that they're backed up. And then I did a first cull for that night. And it's not the finished cull, but I just need to know I've gotten down to more of a manageable number to then go back in, cull again. Or if I have someone helping me with the culling, it's more manageable for them to go. But I love the fact that you schedule in time. I might actually use that myself.
Yeah. It's super important for me. And it's something that I definitely suggest to newer photographers is set that time aside so that you know that you're going to get it done. I think that's where a lot of photographers can, be like, oh, I'll get to it. I'll get to it. I'll get to it. And then you're past the 2 weeks that you said you're going to deliver images, or you're cramming it like right before you are supposed to deliver it. And then you're rushing through it. You don't feel as proud of your work.
I just really like it in the fact that you're scheduling it, giving it as much importance as your shoot. And also it helps if you're a newer photographer realize how long I'm actually taking to edit, which at first you think, oh, if you're scheduling it, okay, I have those 2 hours, I've got a call. Then if you're not outsourcing your editing, okay, well, I've got those 6 hours I've got to edit. Okay, well, that's an 8-hour additional time. And so I think the scheduling it actually works for more than one thing. So I think that that's actually a really good tip. With wedding photography, and you also say you do families, like how do you cope with seasonality? Is there a season?
I live in North Dakota, so we don't get a lot of weddings from about November to about May. There's nothing because our weather is so up in the air. So last week it was 58 degrees, which is unheard of. Usually it's freezing, super cold. But last night we had a huge storm. We got 6 inches of snow and it's negative 20 degrees out right now. So there's a reason why we don't do a lot of weddings in the wintertime. Also, I would say probably in the last 3 years, we have just now started getting dedicated wedding venues. Okay. We didn't have that beforehand. It was mostly church weddings or outdoor weddings or community centers that people are using. So there wasn't a ton of options for people who wanted these beautiful ceremonies indoors. So now we're seeing a few more sprinkled in throughout the off season. But for me, my wedding season is from June to October. Our summers are gorgeous up here. It's usually around 80 degrees and super green all summer. So it's beautiful here in the summer. Winter, it really sucks. And I think I'm going to become a snowbird. Get a house somewhere warmer in the wintertime. So as far as seasonality goes, the way I look at it is there's different times throughout the season that I'm going to be a lot more busy. And that's just the reality of it, my line of work and my location. And so I like to plan out my year. I usually do all of my planning in September. And there's probably a few reasons for it. My birthday is in September. So I'm like, oh, it's a new year for me. And I'm going to reinvent my whole life. But the reason that I do that is even though it's usually right in the middle of my busy season, I don't start work on those things. I just have a plan for what I'm going to do. So the end of my season will usually about mid-October. So having that month to be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do in that off season, whether it is like updating portfolios on my website, redoing any branding that I want to do, or redoing any welcome guides or email templates or anything along those lines. Those are the things I really focus on in that slower season. And then to really set myself up for success in the busy season, I will reevaluate all of my workflows to make sure, okay, this is working well, this is taking longer, this is taking shorter, so I need to adjust this there. I am all about any automations that I can do. If you're using Pixello with automated templates or anything along those lines for studio management, that's the time that, I would really focus in on making those adjustments because I'm not worried about editing or I'm not worried about turning over galleries to clients. And that's what I use that time for. I used to be jealous that I wasn't shooting all year round, but I do like having that downtime, especially here because I'm not shooting weddings over Christmas and New Year's. It's all the holidays generally. The last few years, I keep getting random last minute New Year's Eve weddings. They're like, oh, we're getting married on New Year's Eve, and that's in 2 weeks. Oh, okay.
Did you do them?
Yeah, I did. I think I've done 3 New Year's weddings in the last 3 years here that I don't know. I don't know what it is about people that decide to get married on New Year's Eve. It's always a last minute thing.
That's funny. I mean, I know people do get married, but I'm not a wedding photographer, so I wouldn't have to deal with that. That's interesting in terms of, did it take you a while to get to the, whoa, I have no money for 6 months. What am I going to do? When you're a newer photographer, how did you figure that out? Or did you know right away?
For me, I guess luckily at that time, when I was still married at that point, when I was learning all these things, we didn't have to rely on my wedding photography. But the one thing I will say with wedding photography is a lot of people are getting engaged in that December, January, February. So I still had income coming in because people would book me then. So I would get those deposits coming in at that point, and then the larger chunk of money would come in the month before their wedding. So that's the one nice thing about wedding photography is if you have that longer pre-session booking, like they're not booking like the month of or the week of, they are putting down a deposit. And that definitely helps, cover any last minute thing or like subscriptions. I feel like I have so many subscriptions that are due the first part of the year because that's when I'm doing all my planning and working on stuff. So I sign up for subscriptions. So having those deposits come in is definitely helpful as far as wedding photography goes. And I think it took me a little bit to kind of realize that. And I think that's also why I do so much of that pre-work in October, November, because December, January is when my busy season for booking is. It might not be shooting, but I'm booking and talking to clients a lot more there. And that's why I don't wait until January 1st to do that work because I'm already in the middle of booking season.
So you've already planned out your schedule for the year and you've already started that. That's really smart. Well, speaking of, unless they're a last minute New Year's Eve booking.
Yeah.
So we talk about the red flags for a client. We hear a lot about that in the groups. Do you happen to have any red flags that you know that someone is not going to be the right fit for you?
So I would say I can usually tell within the first questionnaire when someone contacts me whether or not we're going to be a really good fit. And that is really just based on the questions that I ask. So the questions that I ask are super simple. It's name, fiance's name, date, location, email address, all the contact information. And then I only have to ask one other question. And that is, when you think of your wedding photography, what do you envision? And the way that someone answers that question is going to tell me how much they value wedding photography, how invested they are in not just the wedding itself, but what it's going to look like later on and how they're going to look back on those images and feel. And the way that they answer that is going to be one of two ways. Either it's going to be like, I want someone that's going to show up and take cheap wedding pictures, which is answers that I've gotten before. And I can read through that and be like, well, we might not be the best fit, but here's my lookbook. And I'm definitely on the higher end of wedding photographers in my area. I've been doing it a long time and really honed in my craft and really give a really great experience to my couples. But I was on the higher end of wedding photography when I first started because I knew that I wanted to work with a certain caliber of clients. And so by not shooting $400 weddings, I'm not going to get $400 clients. I think there's value in knowing that there are photographers for every budget, and it's okay if I'm not the photographer for you. Even though I live in the middle of nowhere, we have 2,000 people in our town, and there's not 2,000 people getting married every year. And I honestly don't shoot a ton of weddings in my local town. So I end up shooting a lot in Williston and Minot. And so for me, that's anywhere from an hour to 2-hour drive. Now, I do definitely include mileage in my stuff, so I'm being compensated for that time. But last year, all of my weddings were in Minot. The year before, all of my weddings were in Williston. So it was either east or west.
You wonder, is it a demographic thing though? Like people getting married this year and then people getting married this year. Like you just want to know the number of people getting married. That's interesting because I actually have something similar. I can't actually tell in the contact form, but I think I might add that question, like what do you envision for your newborn or family shoot? Because that might actually
or like, how do you want to feel when you look back on these images 5 years from now or 10 years from now? That's a really good question to ask because it also helps you shoot as well. For me, if they're like, I want to see the joy of people around us, then I know that we're going to focus on candids. If they talk about, I want to see how much my husband and I are in love on our wedding day, then we're going to focus on portraits. It kind of helps you gauge what it is that is important to them.
Mine, you can tell via email me and I need photos at this date at this time and it's not an event and it's like, come here, you must be here. Or they said, even via social media, price please. I'm like, hi, how are you? It's like, so
I'm a real person.
Yeah, I can definitely think that you think I'm a store. One of the questions that I like to ask, and feel free, you don't have to answer this or not, but do you have any funny shoot or a weird shoot or best shoot, worst shoot? one of them. You don't have to do all of them.
I'm going to share two.
Okay, good. I love it.
Okay.
I love it.
So the first one is like kind of a funny shoot, I guess. It was a little stressful at the time. I can look back now and laugh about it.
As we all do.
It was, I think 2 years ago, it was a wedding. They were having the wedding outside in a park next to a river. And it was beautiful, but it was hot. It was in the middle of July. And like I said earlier, we usually get around 80, 90s. Every once in a while, we push 100. I would say there's maybe 5 days out of the year where it's over 100. It was like 113 degrees out. There's trees all around us, but where they're having a ceremony, there's no shade whatsoever. And it was just miserable. Everyone was just sweating, and I was wearing this blue dress, which I will now only wear black after this. I was sweating here, and I had boob sweat going on, and my butt was sweating, and you can see
why wedding
photographers
wear black.
Yeah, it was so bad. It was terrible. But the part that was the most stressful is right in the middle of the ceremony. They're doing the ceremony, and the officiant is using an iPad, and the iPad overheats, and he doesn't have anything printed off. They had written their own vows and emailed it to him, and so he was reading it off to them to say back. So they had to go get an ice pack and cool down the iPad, which meant that everyone was sitting there another 20 minutes longer in the heat. In the heat. It was so terrible. So now anytime that I have a wedding that's outdoors, in my emails, if your officiant is using an iPad, make sure they have a printed off version of it as well, because it's gonna overheat, which I had never thought of happening.
I would actually have never thought that would happen. I would never have thought that would happen. I mean, my iPhone has overheated, but I would have never thought that they would actually be reading an iPad. No.
And that was the only copy that they had of it. And so they had this giant ice pack that they pulled out of a cooler that they just set it on and were trying to get it to cool down. And it was just hot outside that day. So it was a little bit miserable. My other story, it was the biggest wedding that I've ever photographed. And it was actually a classmate of mine, and they rented out the Lynx golf course, which is this golf course along the Missouri River that is gorgeous, and all these bluffs in the background. And they got married on the 13th hole, so you can see the river in the background. And it was the second wedding that they'd ever done at this golf course before. And the first one was the week before, so you hadn't even seen pictures from it before. They had fireworks that night.
Oh,
and
wow.
They brought in light up dance floor from Minnesota, and it was gorgeous. This would have been 2019 maybe. So I'd been shooting weddings for quite a while then by that point. And I got home that night, and again, just drenched in sweat because it was hot and humid and bugs were out. And we'd started super early in the morning. And then because they wanted fireworks images as well, in North Dakota in the middle of June, the sun doesn't set, because we're right on the timeline border. So the sun doesn't set until 11:30 at night before it's dark enough for it. So I was there for like 15 hours or something at that point. But I came home and dumped all of my images and just looked in the mirror and, oh my God, you did it. You're a freaking photographer right now. You just shot one of the most amazing things that I'd ever photographed, and was so proud of those images. And I think, like, you're always going to get to a point where, oh my gosh, I'm doing it. But to take the time to really soak it in. And yes, this is what I wanted. This is my ideal client. They are checking every single box. I know on our episode that we did on my podcast, we talked about writing out your ideal client. And this was one of those ideal clients. The bride was in the medical field. Her mom's name was Nancy. Like, all of the things.
Does she have the white car? That's what the white.
She did.
Yeah. The white car was. I love the fact that we took the time looking in the mirror. I actually did this. I especially just always go to the next thing and never feel like I'm good enough. But realistically, if you can do what you did, is, oh wow, I actually just shot that wedding, and take the time, savor it, and realize that you did it. I mean, even if you're a newer photographer, I just shot my first wedding, first shooting. Wow. Take the time to experience it, because you sort of never will have that again. of that feeling of, I just did it, even though, terrified going into it, probably being like, oh, what am I doing? Take the energy of the day, especially 15 hours of, I thought you were.
It was like before I got in the shower, I was covered in sweat.
I thought when you were talking about the mirror, I thought I looked in the mirror and my mascara was all time my face. I was like, where should go with this? And then it was
There's a lot of power in savoring where you're at right now and enjoying the moment, because I think it's real easy to always be grasping for the next better or wanting to do better, and you're never going to feel content with where you're at or satisfied with what you've got going on. So being able to be present and, practicing meditation and all of those things is super important, because otherwise you're always going to be searching for more and better, and you're never going to feel like you've made it. But when you can slow down and take the time to celebrate yourself, celebrate your wins.
I love this celebrating the wins. I have a weird habit of, I don't know if it's a weird habit, but after every shoot, I call it kind of, maybe I watch too many detective shows, but I call it a shoot post-mortem. I always feel like I can be learning, but I also say what went well. So I always have that win. Okay, the 2-year-old that they said was never going to look at the camera and smile actually smiled for the majority of the shoot. That's a win. But then I feel like, well, that location might not have been the best for that age range, so I won't shoot at that location again, or I'll learn, or I'll prep more, or I will add something to my prep email, or Dad, please act as if you care about these photos. I love that. So as we wrap up here, I have one last question. One of your friends, kids, or someone that hey, I'm going to get into photography, what is the one tip that you would give them?
There's a few things. First off, setting your boundaries and stuff and having contracts and all of those things right away is important. But I would say, from a mindset point, share the journey with your audience as you do it. There's so much power in, I guess, almost like vulnerability in sharing how you're evolving as a business owner and all of the things. It's going to, one, give you a little bit of grace from people when you're, hey, I'm trying this thing. I don't know exactly how it's going to work out, but I'm really excited about it. And this is what I want to happen. But if it doesn't happen that way, that's okay too, to have that vulnerability, because one, it kind of builds in this grace from other people and yourself. But two, people love to root for the underdog and to see kind of a peek behind the curtains of how you're building your thing. And I think that, vulnerability is so important in so many different aspects of business. And I don't think that people give it as much power as they could. It's a very powerful tool, is to have that vulnerability in business. And it sounds super scary. And why would I ever show anyone any of my insecurities of it? But that's where you really start to build that authenticity, because you get to show the behind the scenes of how things are going and what you're loving and what you're not loving and why you're loving it. You're going to build this tribe, this community that supports you and loves you and feels like they've been a part of this whole thing along the way. So I think that would be my biggest key of advice, outside of the logistics of all of the things and pricing. That's my thing.
I like that. I think I started my business before social media started. I sort of think I'm a little bit behind, maybe I'm an old dog, learn new tricks type of thing. But I love what you're saying, is to utilize these marketing tools in not just a way like, I haven't shot that many weddings yet, so I can't really share this stuff, but share the process, or share, hey, I'm going to go location scout today. What do you guys think? Or I'm thinking about these 2 setups for a mini session, and share that.
It's like leaving little breadcrumbs along the way of like what you have coming up next. And it helps you also kind of transition, especially when you're first starting out with photography. You're probably not going to end up 10 years from now shooting what you very first started shooting. And that's okay, because you're going to grow and evolve, and seasons of life are going to change for you. For me, the family, newborn stuff, that's where my family was in all of the things when I first started. So that's what I thought I wanted to do, because that's where I was in that season of life. And then finally transitioned into wedding photography. And shooting wedding photography while you're going through a divorce is a really weird thing.
You should have a course on that, man. You should have a course. There's quite a few people, quite a few wedding photographers that I know. I spoke to one a couple of weeks ago. He's struggling with his marriage falling apart. I actually think it could be, or a good few podcast episodes on it, of how to, for your next married podcast. I think that,
That would be a good one. I'm gonna take that. That's a good idea. It was so weird going through marriage counseling with our pastor and then going and shooting a wedding that he was officiating the next week. This is weird.
Oh, like
also because he was like the only one at the time that knew our marriage was totally falling apart.
Oh wow, so you even have the same pastor officiating the wedding.
Small town,
Small town. Yeah, that's interesting. How do you overcome? Because we tend to put a lot of ourselves into it. I actually ended up giving them, it's like, some of them are going to have to go on, you've been doing this a long time, you're going to have to kind of go on autopilot, versus getting into it or have a second shooter or a lead photographer if you're really going to start bawling when they do their vows. This has been amazing, Chelsy. I really appreciate it. Tell our audience how they can find you and what you have going on, because I know that you have a lot of different things that people can listen to you and take courses. We will put it in the show notes.
I am on social media, Chelsy Weisz, CHELSYWEISZ. It's spelled super weird, but that's where I'm at on all the things. That's my website as well. If you want to check out the blogging stuff, I have a ton of resources for photographers that are wanting to just learn more about blogging. There's a course as well, but I have a ton of freebies. Those are all at chelseaweisz.com/blogging. There's quite a few downloads there that you can choose from to kind of dip your toe into that. Otherwise, we have my podcast, which is the Next Brave Step podcast. You can find us on all of the different platforms. I know we had Jane on a few weeks ago to do her episode, which was super great. That podcast really focuses on finding the courage to take that next brave step forward in business, whether it's starting your business, whether it is transitioning to maybe a new industry or pivoting your business as well. We also talk a little bit about some lifestyle stuff, and my divorce is definitely part of that story as well. I think there's a lot of power in finding the courage to take the next brave step forward, and it doesn't have to be a huge step. As long as you keep taking little steps forward, you're going to end up to where it is that you want to go. So yeah, that's where I'm at online. I hope you guys can all come check us out. And I'm so thankful to have been one of the guests on the new podcast here. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
This has been absolutely amazing. And I do love your vulnerability about everything that you've gone through and being able to share that with other people to help them as well. Hats off to you. Definitely check her out. Her podcast is amazing. Not just my episode with Chelsy, but, she has a lot of great episodes. Maybe one coming on Divorce and Being a Wedding Photographer, right?
Yeah. I think I'm sitting down today to plan out some more episodes for the next month. So maybe by the time you hear this, that one will already be up.
Yeah, we'll link it. All right. Thanks, Chelsy.